The Bible contains stories that span generations and reveal profound truths about humanity. But there is an aspect that is rarely explored: the influence of African peoples in the scriptures. If you've never wondered about this, you're about to discover a surprising connection between African civilizations and the divine plan. Prepare yourself for a journey that may change your perspective on the origins of faith and the role of peoples who shaped sacred history. From the very beginning, God created humanity in its diversity, and African civilizations are an essential part of that plan. The biblical narrative mentions several peoples who played fundamental roles in the development of nations, including Egypt, Nubia, and Canaan. The cultural and historical richness of these peoples directly influenced crucial events in the scriptures, proving that the Bible is not limited to a single people, but encompasses the grandeur of God's creation in all its complexity. If you desire to deepen your spiritual life and strengthen your connection with God, there's something that can transform your life. The prayer journal 30 Days to a Deep Encounter with God is an essential guide for those seeking to renew their faith and find spiritual direction. It offers daily reflections, powerful prayers, and teachings that will touch your soul. The link to get yours is in the first pinned comment of this video. Don't miss this opportunity to transform your spiritual journey. Now let's dive into this fascinating story. The relationship between African peoples and the Bible begins shortly after the flood, with Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. According to the biblical account, Ham had 4 sons: Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. Each of these descendants gave rise to peoples who played central roles in the biblical narrative and influenced the formation of powerful civilizations. Cush is often identified with the region of Nubia and Ethiopia. Throughout the Bible, we find several references to Cush as a land of dark-skinned people, with great military and economic influence. Isaiah 18 describes Cush as a territory of formidable warriors and diplomats who sent ambassadors along great rivers. Jeremiah 13:23 mentions the identity of the Cushites by asking, "Can the Ethiopian change his skin?" This recognition of Cush's physical and cultural characteristics reinforces its importance in sacred history. Another fascinating detail is that Moses' wife was a Cushite. In Numbers 12:1, Miriam and Aaron criticize Moses for marrying a woman from Cush. However, God rebukes them, proving that his covenant is not limited to a single ethnicity, but extends to all peoples. This episode shows that since ancient times, God was already demonstrating that his message was universal and that all nations had a role within his plan. Mizraim, in turn, is identified with Egypt, one of the most influential civilizations of antiquity. Egypt was a center of knowledge, architecture, and religion, playing an essential role in the history of the Hebrews. The Israelites sought refuge there during times of famine, as in the cases of Abraham and Joseph. Later, Egypt would become the setting for the oppression of the Hebrew people and the powerful deliverance led by Moses in the Exodus. The relationship between Israel and Egypt is complex. On one hand, Egypt served as a place of refuge and provision. Joseph, sold into slavery by his brothers, rose to power in Egypt and saved many lives during a great famine. On the other hand, the oppression of the Hebrews by Pharaoh gave rise to one of the Bible's most iconic stories, the 10 plagues and the parting of the Red Sea, which marked the liberation of the chosen people. This duality between shelter and oppression made Egypt one of the most significant settings in the Bible. Put, another descendant of Ham, is associated with the regions of Libya and North Africa. Though less frequently mentioned, he appears in biblical prophecies linked to military alliances. Ezekiel 35 includes Put among the nations that would face divine judgment. Put's presence in military coalitions indicates that his descendants held strategic relevance and influence in the conflicts of that era. Finally, we have Canaan, the ancestor of the Canaanites, who inhabited the Promised Land before the arrival of the Israelites. Canaan and his descendants are often depicted in direct conflict with Israel, but their culture significantly influenced the region. The Canaanites practiced idolatrous rituals, which led God to order their destruction so that the Israelites would remain faithful to his covenant. However, the relationship between Israelites and Canaanites wasn't solely one of war, but also involved cultural exchanges and interactions that impacted the history of God's people. The descendants of Ham were not just distant biblical characters, but protagonists in fundamental events that shaped humanity's history. Their influence was immense, from Egypt with its splendor and complex relationship with the Israelites, to Cush and its constant presence in prophecies and the history of the patriarchs. When analyzing these narratives, we realize that the Bible does not exclude any people, but rather includes them within the divine plan. Acts 17:26 states, "From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth." This means that, regardless of origins, all are part of the same creation of God and share a purpose within his story. Furthermore, Revelation 7:9 presents a heavenly vision in which a great multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and language worships God. This passage reaffirms that humanity's diversity is not an accident, but a manifestation of divine glory. African civilizations, often overlooked in conventional biblical studies, had a significant impact on the spiritual and historical context of the scriptures. The presence of African characters and nations in the Bible reveals that God always had a comprehensive plan, including all ethnicities in his covenant. As we explore these connections, we are invited to see the Bible in a new light, understanding that faith transcends borders and that the divine plan is for all humanity. This perspective encourages us to value diversity, recognize the richness of cultures, and understand that the story of salvation is one shared by all peoples. If this reflection has brought you new insights, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This helps us continue bringing enlightening content that strengthens your faith. Also, share this video with someone who might be interested in this surprising biblical revelation. The story of African peoples in the Bible reminds us that God has always been working in all nations, calling people from different backgrounds to be part of his plan. Whether in the power of Egypt, the resilience of Cush, or the complexity of Canaan, we see that every people has its importance in sacred history. The cultural and historical richness of African peoples is intrinsically linked to the biblical account, proving that the influence of these civilizations goes beyond what many imagine. Egypt, Nubia, Ethiopia, and Canaan were the stage for fundamental events that helped shape the course of sacred history. Throughout the scriptures, God used different peoples to fulfill his purposes. The African presence in the Bible is not merely incidental, but a reflection of the divine inclusion of all nations in his plan. When we examine the trajectory of Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan, we realize that these peoples played essential roles in both the Old and New Testaments. The lineage of Cush is particularly noteworthy. The Cushites appear in various biblical passages as a strong, resilient people with great influence. One of the most striking examples is the Ethiopian eunuch mentioned in Acts 8. This high-ranking official of Queen Candace was reading the prophet Isaiah when Philip was sent by the Holy Spirit to evangelize him. This encounter resulted in one of the first recorded baptisms in Christianity, demonstrating that African peoples were already part of the plan of salvation from the earliest days of the Church. The impact of Ham's descendants is also evident in Egypt's history. The relationship between the Hebrews and Egyptians spans centuries and involves periods of alliance, refuge, and oppression. Moses, one of the most important figures in the Bible, was raised as a prince of Egypt before becoming Israel's deliverer. His connection to this great civilization proves that God uses different contexts and cultures to accomplish his plans. Moreover, Egypt served as a refuge at various points in biblical history. Abraham went down to Egypt during a great famine and found sustenance there. Centuries later, Joseph, who had been sold into slavery, became governor of Egypt and ensured his family's survival. In the New Testament, Mary and Joseph fled to Egypt with the baby Jesus to escape King Herod's persecution, once again showing the essential role of this land in preserving God's chosen ones. Another descendant of Ham, Put, may not be mentioned as often, but his military influence was recognized. The people of Put were known as skilled warriors and served as mercenaries in powerful armies. Ezekiel 35 and Jeremiah 46.9 mention Put alongside other nations in contexts of war. This demonstrates that Ham's descendants were involved in alliances and conflicts that shaped the geopolitics of the time. As for Canaan, Ham's youngest son, he is among the most frequently mentioned peoples in the Bible. His descendants inhabited the Promised Land before the Israelites arrived, and the interactions between these two peoples are a central theme of the Old Testament. Canaan and his descendants, the Canaanites, were known for their idolatrous practices and posed a significant challenge to the Israelites. However, Canaanite cultural influence also left its mark on the history of God's people. The conquest of Canaan's land, led by Joshua, symbolizes the fulfillment of God's promises, but also carries lessons about faith, obedience, and the consequences of idolatry. The presence of the Canaanites in the biblical narrative underscores the complexity of interactions between ancient peoples and how God used these relationships to teach and discipline his chosen nation. Despite the conflicts, there are moments in the Bible that show the inclusion of Canaanites in the divine plan. One of the most striking examples is Rahab, a Canaanite woman who helped Israelite spies before the fall of Jericho. Her faith saved her, and she became part of the people of Israel, even being included in the genealogy of Jesus. This episode demonstrates that God does not reject peoples or ethnicities, but values those who show faith and obedience to his word. Another key point is that the nations descended from Ham are mentioned in various prophecies. Zephaniah 3:10 refers to Ethiopia, saying, "From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my worshippers, my scattered people, will bring me offerings." This passage reaffirms that African peoples were not distant from the divine plan, but were part of it and recognized for their devotion to the true God. Isaiah 45:14 also mentions the Cushites as a people of great stature and importance, foretelling that one day they would acknowledge the sovereignty of the God of Israel. These prophecies not only validate the African presence in the Bible, but also point to a future in which all nations would bow before the Creator. The African presence in the Bible extends to the New Testament as well. Beyond the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts 8, we have Simon of Cyrene, an African man who was forced to carry Jesus' cross on the way to Calvary. This seemingly small detail reveals the intersection of different peoples in the story of redemption. Additionally, the early church included members of African origin. In Acts 13:1, we find Simeon, called Niger, among the prophets and teachers of the church in Antioch. This reinforces the idea that Christianity has always been a global and diverse faith, including people from different backgrounds from its earliest days. The vision in Revelation 7:9 confirms this reality, describing a great multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and language, worshiping God. This passage is a powerful reminder that humanity's diversity is not a mistake or a barrier, but an expression of God's glory. As we analyze all these connections, it becomes clear that the history of African peoples in the Bible is rich and profound. Their descendants not only participated in significant events, but also played an active role in fulfilling the divine plan. By valuing this diversity, we are reminded that God makes no distinction between peoples and that His covenant is for all humanity. Studying the Bible from this perspective allows us to broaden our understanding of faith and recognize that all nations have a purpose within the divine plan. If this video has brought you new perspectives on the Bible, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This helps us continue producing content that builds your faith and expands your knowledge of the Scriptures. Share this video with friends and family so more people can discover this inspiring truth. The story of African peoples in the Bible teaches us that God is always working through nations, using people from different backgrounds to fulfill His purposes. Whether in the power of Egypt, the resilience of Cush, the military strength of Put, or the complexity of Canaan, we see that every people has its importance in sacred history. Every culture, every nation, and every people reflect the grandeur of the Creator and are part of the divine plan. May this truth inspire us to value diversity and recognize that in Christ we are all one people, united by God's love. May God bless you and see you in the next video.